In this tutorial, I want to show you how you can take a project that you've created with the GDevelop game engine and manually build an Android app. And this is not something you need to know how to do in order to make Android games with GDevelop, because GDevelop already has a free service included in their game engine that will build your GDevelop project into either an APK that you can test on Android devices or an Android app bundle that you can load into the Google Play Store. So you don't need to know how to manually turn your GDevelop project into an Android app in order to make Android games with GDevelop. But it is something that's useful to know how to do, so I'd like to make a tutorial on that anyway. And this is the second tutorial I have done on this subject. I did one exactly the same as what I'm going to do here last night. But after I recorded it, I made the thumbnail, uploaded it. Later that night, when I went to actually watch it on YouTube, I noticed that it was so blurry you couldn't even follow along with what I was typing or what I was doing. And so I decided, in the best interest of my channel, because if anyone came to my channel and saw that video and the quality of it, they would never want to watch another tutorial I ever made. So I decided to delete that video and change some settings in my screen recorder and redo the whole thing, and hopefully this will come out a lot better, and so people will be able to follow along with what I'm doing, and also not decide that I never want to see one of these tutorials again. So we're gonna run through this really quickly since it's the second time I've had to do it. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is talk about the 3 programs we need to install in order to build our GDevelop projects into Android apps. And we're going to need Node.js, and we're going to need Cordova, and we're going to need Android Studio. And right now, Android Studio version is Flamingo. Okay, now we're going to need Node.js because we need Cordova, and Cordova runs on Node.js, so that's why we're going to install Node.js. We need Cordova because Cordova is what is going to prepare our GDevelop project into something that can be opened in Android Studio. And we're going to need Android Studio because we're going to use Android Studio's built-in Gradle plugin, and we're going to use Android Studio's Java environment to compile and build our GDevelop game into an Android app. So if we go to the documentation, let's go to the GDevelop wiki. And I'm also going to go to get Cordova ready. Okay, so in the GDevelop wiki, if we were to search for manual builds, and we would go to the manual export tab down here where it says mobile, they already have instructions on how we can publish our game to Android manually using Cordova. We're not going over iOS in this tutorial because this machine was not made by Apple, so it would be against Apple terms of service for me to install Mac OS on it. So in this tutorial, we're just going over Android. And the steps they list in their documentation, and the steps, they also give this link, Cordova required tools. The steps listed here are not the steps we're going to take to manually build our GDevelop projects into Android apps. And I'm just going to go through the difference. What this page and this page are assuming is that they're assuming we are going to be building our GDevelop project into an Android app in this command terminal right here. Okay? They are assuming that we're going to be doing everything in this command line interface. So that is why they have extra things like they want us to install the Java 11, the JDK 11, Gradle, If you go over here to Cordova, they want us to change our system variables, our environment variables. Okay, they want us to do all that because they're assuming we're going to be building our entire project in here. But we're not going to be building our project here. We're only going to be using this command prompt to run one simple command telling Cordova to prepare our project into something we can then open into Android Studio and use Android Studio to build our project. And since Android Studio already has its own little version of Java and its own little Gradle plugin, we don't need to install these. We would only need to install these if we were building our whole project in here. Because, of course, from here, Cordova wouldn't be able to access the Android Studio's Gradle plugin. See what I mean? So that is why there's a difference between the official documentation and this version of how to do it that I'm going to show you. So, for instance, if you scroll down to the bottom, it's going to say in the documentation for working with iOS, they recommend that we open the project after we prepare it here. We would say Cordova platform add iOS, and then they would recommend that we then open that project in Xcode to finish building it and to sign it and to do all that. So that's actually what we're going to be doing, but we'll be doing that in Android. We are going to say Cordova platform add Android, and then we're going to open our project in Android Studio and build it that way. So the good thing about this is if later you decide you want to go on and learn how to build your project completely in this terminal, you already have, just by installing what we're going to install, you already have half of what you need installed already. Because even if you want to build it this way, you would still need to install Node.js, Cordova, and Android Studio. So I'm not having you install anything that the documentation doesn't want you to install anyway. All we're doing is we're not installing Gradle, we're not installing the JDK development kit, and we're not editing our path or our environment variables. So let's go ahead and download these 3 programs we're going to need. And if you go to the Apache website, which I'll leave a link in the description, we can go scroll down to the Get Started Fast Guide, and it says Cordova command line runs on Node.js, and they leave a link. So if we click that link, it's going to take us to the page where we can download Node.js. And the version we want to download is going to be this LTS version, because this one works nicely with NPM, whereas the current version might have problems with NPM. So you want to do the long-term support version. So go ahead and let's get started downloading that. Okay, so once it's done downloading, we can just open our downloads folder, double click it, and a wizard will come up and we can follow along with that. So hit next on the first screen. On this screen, just accept the terms of the terms of use agreement. You can install it anywhere. I'm just going to leave it at the default. You're going to want to leave all these the way they're set right now. This is optional and we don't need it for what we're going to do. And now we can click install. And we'll just give it a minute while it installs. Okay, once it's successfully installed, just hit finish. And I'm going to go ahead and delete mine right now because we don't need it. So now that it's installed, let's go back to Cordova and see what we need to do. It says follow platform specific guides. Now this guide right here is for Windows. I'm on Windows 10 right now on this computer. It says open a command prompt if you're on Windows, or a terminal if you're on Mac, and type npm install Cordova, and it has a little thing where we can copy that to the clipboard, but I'm just going to highlight it and control C it. So we need to open a command prompt or a terminal, and I do have this one open, but it was open before I installed Node, so if I ran the command here it wouldn't work. So I'm just going to need to close this and open a fresh one. Now if you don't have yours set up on a shortcut key, you can just type here to search and put CMD enter, and it will pull up your command prompt. So this is where we can paste this line we copied in. You can just hit Control V and it's going to paste it right in there. And actually though, before we do that, I want you to type npm install and then put a -G and put npm, because right now, let me show you. If I put npm -v and pulled up what version of npm came installed with our Node program that we just downloaded. Okay, actually I don't need to do that, so because this is the current version, but you can check your version by putting npm/v, and if you get anything lower than this 9.6.5, which I believe that's just because I've already installed it, because yesterday when I checked the version that came bundled with the Node we installed, it was at like 9.5, and so you want to make sure you're updated to this newer npm. So you would just hit, if you run this command to get the version and get like 9.5, then just go npm install -G and then put npm and then hit enter, and it would install the latest version of npm. But now that we have that out of the way, just go ahead and Control V the little command that we copied from the Cordova page, and it's going to install Cordova for us. Okay, now Cordova is almost done installing, and I just wanted to show you that you will be getting these warnings about old things, and this functionality has been moved to this, and this is no longer supported. Don't worry about these for now. What we're going to do is still going to work, and if you went to Cordova's blog, you see they're preparing for a next major release, which I expect to be soon after the fall, when Android updates their minimum targeted API that they'll let you release to the Google Play Store. So Cordova is getting ready for a major release, and I think it will take care of all these items right here. So just don't worry about that for now. So we do have Cordova installed right now. So of our list of programs, we now have Node.js, and that npm just comes bundled with Node.js, the one I told you to check to see what version you had. And we have Cordova installed. So now the next thing we need is Android Studio. So if we go back to the homepage of Cordova, or you can even go to the link we got from GDevelop, but I'll show you how to get there if you're just using the link I left in the description. You would want to go to this documentation tab up here, go over here to develop for platforms and hit Android, and then just scroll down the page until you see Android Studio and click that link, and it's going to take you to the Android Studio download. And you just click this button, download Android Studio Flamingo, accept the terms and conditions, and it's going to start that download for Android Studio. And it's going to give you an Android Studio user badge. Okay, once Android Studio finishes downloading, we can just open our downloads folder, double click it to install. And it'll pull up the installation wizard. Just allow it to make changes to your computer. And go ahead and click Next to continue. This is just asking you what you want to install. Android Studio is mandatory, and it also has a pre-configured optimized Android virtual device for app testing on the emulator, which is recommended. So you can install that if you want to. I think I'll skip it actually, because I don't think this computer would handle that. In the location, just go ahead and click whatever it said, or you can make a custom location for it. This, I'm just leaving this the same too, and give it a moment while it installs. Okay, once it's finished installing, we can hit next. And it's going to ask us if we want to click finish and start the Android Studio. And we do, because we need to set up a few more things. So just click finish with this selection checked. Just going to open our Android Studio Flamingo. It's going to ask us if we want to import any settings we might have already been using with Android Studio. I just put do not import. It's going to ask us if we want to allow Google to collect usage data. I'm not going to send mine, but you can send yours if you want. And it's going to do a quick setup wizard for setting up our development environment. And if you chose to install the pre-configured emulator, you can just go with the standard install or custom. Either way, it's going to be pretty much the same. This is just asking me where I want to put the Java development kit that the Android Studio uses when building our projects. This is just asking what theme I want. Oh, let me go back. You can choose the light theme if you like that better, and there's a dark theme also. This is just asking what we want to install, and it's kind of misleading because it just makes you install these. Except for you don't have to install the Performance Android Emulator Hypervisor Driver or the Android Virtual Device. Now, since I didn't do the emulator, I'm not going to install this virtual device, but I will still install the Emulator Hypervisor Driver in case I want to add a virtual device later, because this thing is a pain in the butt to install manually. So you could have just hit standard if you were doing the the virtual Android device anyway. I just hit custom because I just wanted to remove this bottom one. And now that we're finished, it says click next to proceed. It has us just double check what we wanted to install. And now we're on this top one, so we hit click accept over there, and we can come down and click this bottom arrow and hit accept here, and our finish button will show up, and we can go ahead and it will download the components it needs to set up our development environment. When it is nearly finished with this installation, if you chose to keep the hypervisor driver installer checked, near the end of the installation, when it gets to that part, you're going to see Windows asking you if this command terminal, it'll say command processor, if you want to allow that to make changes to your system. Just hit yes, because that's the hypervisor driver installer doing its thing. Okay, once it's done downloading its components, we can go ahead and hit finish. and it's going to start Android Studio for the first time. But we're not quite done setting it up for our purposes, which is turning our GDevelop projects into Android applications manually. So let's go back to the GDevelop documentation and see what they say under the Android Studio setup. Okay, and it does say in this little tip image here, it says that Cordova may need a specific version of the Android build tool. It can be installed with the SDK manager. Ensure you have the Android SDKs version 30 and 31. Okay. Now let's go to the Cordova documentation and see what it says about Android Studio. And it says that it is recommended to install the highest supported version of SDK platform and build tools based on the project's installed version of Cordova-Android. Please see the Android API level support to find the supported version based on Cordova-Android versions. So if we go up here to our Android API level support, this is the latest version currently. They are working on a new one in order to meet, Google will be changing their minimum targeted SDK that they allow in the Google Play Store if you're releasing an app there in the fall, I believe. So if you read the blog, they are already working on making the next Cordova Android version. And this does not mean it's Android version 11. That's just the version of Cordova Android that we're using right now. And it supports these Android API levels. And API levels, the targeted one it supports, and this is the targeted one, is 32, which is Android 12L. And the minimum API that it will be compatible with is 22, which is Android version 5.1. So when Cordova prepares our GDevelop projects, it will already set this in the Gradle build file that the minimum allowable Android version would be 5.1 and that the targeted version would be this. So it will still run on lower devices than 12, but 12 is just the minimum it would run. 5.1 is just the minimum that it would run on. So since we're doing API level 32, which is Android 12L, then we need to also import, what did it say? We need to also install those platform and build tools. So besides the 30 and 31 that GDevelop wants, we're also going to do 32, which Cordova says, okay? And Cordova also wants us to go into the Android SDK tools and open the, I'll show you how to do that. And it wants us to find the tools that says Android SDK tools obsolete. Right here. So let's go get our Android Studio set up with those things that we'll need right now. So on your welcome screen here, go ahead and go to More Actions and then go to your SDK Manager. Okay, so in our SDK Manager, we see we have a Platforms, SDK Platforms tab, and an SDK Tools tab. And so that's what Cordova meant when they said they want us to install the highest supported version of the SDK platform and the build tools. So here is platform and here is build tools. And our highest SDK platform for this version of Cordova Android that we'll be using is 32. So in your platforms tab, we're going to find 32, which is the Android 12L that Cordova targets here. And we're going to check that because we're going to want to install that. And it'll give us this button saying, well, we don't have that, so we're going to download it, okay? And then GDevelop said that we should have Android SDKs of version 30 and 31. So we're also going to find 30, which is right here, Android 11. And we're going to find 31, which is right here, the Android 12 regular, I guess. Okay, so now we have those three things, the one Cordova wanted and the two that GDevelop wanted. So now let's leave our SDK Platforms tab and we'll go into the SDK Tools tab. And in the SDK Tools tab, we're not going to be able to see what we want. And that's what Cordova means when they're giving us these instructions on open the SDK Manager, go to the SDK Tools tab, and go to the bottom, uncheck Hide Obsolete Packages. So down here where it says Hide Obsolete Packages, we need to uncheck that. And then we also want to show package details, because that way we can find what we're looking for really easy. And so besides doing the platform 32, as they said here, do the SDK platform, they also want us to do the 32 build tools. So in our tools where we just we showed the package details, we're also going to find 32.0.0 in here. And if we don't, we're going to get build errors when we try to build our GDevelop projects. And then GDevelop had us do also 30 and 31. So in the SDK Tools tab, we're also going to find 31 and 30. 30.0.0 and 31.0.0. And now, the Cordova one also wanted us to find a package called Android SDK Tools parentheses around obsolete. So we'll have to scroll down here to find it. And here it is right here under the Android SDK command line tools. We're going to go down here where it says Android SDK command line tools obsolete. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. It just wants us to do regular SDK tools obsolete. So let's keep going. Well, actually, that must be what it is, because that's the only thing I'm seeing. So go ahead and hit this, Android SDK command line tools obsolete. Nope, I found it. It's keep going where I told you to check it right here where it says Android SDK command line tools. Uncheck that because it's right below it. Right here, Android SDK tools obsolete. That's the one that they want us to do. Okay, so now that we have everything they wanted us checked for download, both the GDevelop documentation and the Cordova documentation, we're going to go ahead and apply these changes, and it's going to say confirm changes, and it'll show us what we've selected, and you just go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to take a moment while it downloads these things we've requested from it. Okay, so Android Studio is done downloading our additional components, and sometimes when it gets done, you're going to see an error. It'll tell you maybe a connection had closed while it was downloading one of them, and it'll say that one didn't get installed, and it'll give you what number it is. And if that happens in that case, you would just go back into either your platforms or your tools, depending on which one didn't install, and say it didn't install the API level 32 here. It would say maybe partially installed. Just go ahead and recheck that and go ahead and hit apply to re-download it, and that time it should work for you. So now that we've got our Android Studio set up the way that the GDevelop documentation and the Cordova documentation wants us to get it set up, we can go ahead and hit OK. And at this point, we have everything we need ready to start manually building our GDevelop projects. So we'll go ahead and open GDevelop real quick, and we'll just make a quick test project that we can export and build into an Android application. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to Learn, and I'm just going to choose an example that we can build into an Android application manually. Okay, so I think we'll go with this pairs example. There was a lot of good examples that we could do, but I don't necessarily want to do anything that's going to submit to a leaderboard right now. I'm just going to call this pairs manual example, and I'm going to choose a different folder than that. I'm just going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to make a new folder here, and I'm going to put pairs example. I'll just put pairs project, and I'll enter that folder, and I'll create another new folder, and I'm going to call this pairs project, and we'll save it in this folder. So I'll open this folder and just select it and create the project. Okay, when you're making games or projects in GDevelop that you're intending to build into Android applications, one of the most important things you can do is to come in here and change this package name right here, because otherwise you're going to end up with a lot of projects that have the same default package name, and it's really going to throw you off when you're building them. So we'll just call it whatever you want. Make sure it's something that's unique to that game, and that other developers or you won't have a same package name somewhere else. Okay, so now that you've changed your package name, we can go ahead and export this into something that we can open up into Android Studio. So go up at the top of your screen where it says Publish, and normally you would export to other platforms. You could say mobile, and you could do an APK or an Android app bundle for free, and you would just have a certain amount of builds depending on if you were a free member, if you were a silver or gold, you know. So what we're going to do though is we're going to hit publish, and right under that where you see build manually, hit that button, and then go to the mobile tab, and you can see that this will export your game as a Cordova project. So let's go ahead and I'm going to choose a new folder for that, and I'm going to go back into my main folder that's called Pairs Project, and I'm going to create a new folder called Pairs Export 1, and we're just going to select that folder, and that's where I'm going to export this to. And I just wanted to make sure it was going to be in this empty folder. Okay, so go ahead and hit package once you've selected the empty folder you want it in. And it only takes a few moments to package it and export it. Okay, so we can go ahead and close that. And if we see our folder on GDevelop, now I have a command terminal open, but in order to run Cordova, we need to open the command terminal in the folder that we exported our project to. So go to our pairs export, or wherever you just exported your project, and double click that to open it. And now in this address bar here, go ahead and highlight it and put CMD enter, and that'll bring up your command prompt in that export folder, which is what we need to do in order to run some Cordova commands. And if you go to the documentation here, we can see right here the next step after what we just did. We would want to run this command, Cordova platform add Android at 11, to export, get to prepare our Android game into something that can be opened with Android Studio. So let's go ahead and do that in our command prompt. You can just copy this, or you can type it. It's really not a lot to type. And just paste it here. And the reason why we're saying add Android at 11, that's the Cordova Android version we want. And right now it's not pinned. So if we had just run Cordova platform add Android, it would make our Android version be the Cordova Android version 10.1.4, which we don't want that. We want it to be this Cordova Android version. So that's why in our command prompt we say Cordova platform add Android at 11. And once you hit that, once you paste that in there with your Control V command, just go ahead and hit enter. And it'll take a few moments to prepare the platform file. And what it's going to do, it's going to make some new folders in our export folder that we're running this command in. Okay, so once it's done, you are going to see this plugin doesn't support this project's Cordova Android version. For the whitelist plugin, don't worry about that. That's just something that's built into any version of the Cordova Android that's higher than 10.0.0. So you don't really have to worry about that. You can remove that plugin and add a new plugin if you wanted. But you can also just leave it as is and it's fine. Okay, so once that's done, we can see in the folder where we had exported our GDevelop project that it's added some more folders. In one directory it's added is called Platforms, and that's where we're going to see a directory called Android. And we would see all these things if we opened it up. And this directory right here is what we're going to open in Android Studio. So I'm going to just double click it just to get the entire address in my address bar here, where I can highlight it and hit Control C to copy it. And then we can come back to Android Studio and we can hit open, and it's going to ask us what project we can open. And you can just go through this list, find your name so that you can find your desktop or your documents or wherever you've stored your project, and you can just get to your project that way if you want. But let me just paste that in right. But I just paste it in so that it takes me directly to that directory here, this little Android folder. And once I have that right here selected, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to ask me if I trust that project, and I'll just put trust. And the first time Android Studio opens up in general, no matter what you're doing, it could take up to 5-10 minutes, because it's going to be setting up, it's going to be updating its indexes, scanning everything, setting up the environment with all the stuff we just downloaded and all that. So don't be alarmed if the first time you open it, it takes a while to get going. It does not always take that long. Now, one thing I will note while this is getting set up is that sometimes if you make a change in one of your folders, like say we decided to move our Android platform folder that we're going to open, we decided to move it on the desktop. That list I showed you at the beginning where we selected our project, sometimes it takes a while for it to update. So if you then go to navigate to your folder and you don't see where you have just put it now, but you do see it as it was before you moved it, just go ahead. You can refresh your folder, or you can bump out. You can close your project in Android Studio and go back to the main menu and then reopen it, and then everything should be where you've just moved it to in that list that we were looking at. So you don't have to exit totally out of Android Studio you would just, if you ever get into the project and then go to navigate a file, or like your key store that you've stored somewhere but you've moved it, it just might not show up right away in the list. So you would just close your project, go back into your project, and then it should be there. Okay, so it's still doing some indexing tasks for the Android Studio itself, but it has built our or it has put our GDevelop project over here, so we can actually start looking around at it. Here's your Android manifest XML. Might take a minute to open because it is still doing little chores for itself. Here's your Gradle scripts. You don't really need to know any of those. They can be interesting to look at. Bear in mind, anything you overwrite in your Android manifest XML, any value you put in here directly can be overwritten by your build Gradle file. So it might be better if you wanted to change something in here just to go find your build Gradle file and actually change it in there. But really, we probably won't be messing with any of this because I'm just showing you how to build your GDevelop projects manually with Android Studio, not how to edit your GDevelop projects in Android Studio. So right here on the side is your device manager, and this is where you would add more virtual devices if you wanted to. I didn't install one with mine, so I have none listed. And you can just hit create device. And when it opens up, it'll give you phone, tablet, Wear, desktop. Hit the device you want to create and hit next. And it'll generate a list for you to choose from. And you can just, if it has this little arrow, it means you download those components. And then you would just hit next or finish when you're done checking the ones you wanted. It'll give you some more terms of service to accept, and then you would accept that and it would download those for you. If you want to run your app on a virtual device, you would hit this little play button. This is your notification pane. Let me close the device manager. Your notification pane, when you make APKs, it stores it at a default location, and the easiest way for you to locate it is just to, when it's done building your app into an APK or an app bundle, a little notice will come up here for a minute and then it'll disappear, and you can open your notification pane and it'll give you a link to your app or your APK or your app bundle. And I like to drag them and just put them in a different folder in my project file with like the version name. Okay, so this right here would be if you had your physical device hooked up, and also this logcat right here. Right now it says no connected devices, but I know it works for physical devices. It'll show your device here. It might work for virtual devices. I don't tend to use the virtual devices. Okay, so for this tutorial, I'm just going to build a debug APK because it's already getting kind of late and I did this tutorial once already. So I'm going to split it up right now, and we're going to build our first debug APK with Android Studio, and then we can install that on our devices to test how our project is working. And then I'll do a follow-up video where we go through making a Android app bundle with Android Studio. So to build a debug APK, we can come up here to build, and we're going to see build bundles APKs right here, or generate signed bundles APKs right here. And we will just use, for our debug APKs, we'll just go ahead and use build bundles APKs without signing them. So hit this one and go to build APK. And it's going to get started. And while it's doing that, I do want to say where it says project update recommended, it's going to tell you we have a new Gradle plugin. You can go ahead and start the Android Gradle assistant to start upgrading that. I'm not going to right now for me because it's getting pretty late and I just want to finish this tutorial. Okay, it has finished building our APK. And if this notification disappeared and you still wanted to locate it, you can go ahead and open your notification pane and just hit this link to locate it. And it will open the folder it's saved to do. Sorry, this computer that I'm using for this demonstration isn't really the best one, so. Okay, so once it opens that, you have your APK debug. You can rename that as long as you would, of course, keep the APK extension at the end. And you can just drag this out and put it in your project folder if you want. And I have my device. You can now test your devices, your project on your device. So I already have my device hooked up to my computer, so I can just drag that into my device folder. And it's going to make a copy of that on my Android device, which this one was a $30 Android phone I picked up. But make sure you choose the download folder. I'd accidentally put documents, and of course it would not copy it to my documents. So just make sure you choose the download folder. Then you can go onto your device and find that file and install it. So really quick, I'll just make sure I turn my USB debugging on my phone, and I'm going to go ahead and open a little program just to have my phone be visible on this screen. So you can see what I'm doing. Oh, let me allow it and let me try that again. Okay, so now that you can see, now that you can see my phone on the screen, let's see, where did it go? And just ignore, like, most of the stuff on this phone came with it, because it's just a little $30 phone I had picked up. Let's see. But find your files, and you can go to your downloads and go ahead and install your project. Okay, and then you can go ahead and open it. Okay, and as you can see, you've just, if you were following along with me, you've just manually turned a GDevelop project into an Android application. And you can also, instead of having to install it on your device, you can also just hook it up to your device with these USB debugging enabled, and then you would see your device here in Android Studio, and you would see it in the logcat. So see, as we're playing the game, this logcat is giving us information about what's going on, and that can be super useful for you when you are developing your projects. So you can always open them in Android Studio, turn on the USB debugging of your device and hook it up to your computer with a USB cord, and Android Studio will show your device here, and it'll show your device here, and you don't even have to install your app like I did by dragging it into your downloads folder and installing it that way. The reason I did that is I wanted to show you that what we did indeed make an Android APK manually, so you could see, oh yeah, it does work, this is worth going through this tutorial for. But another way we could have done it is to just install it on our project by hitting this run button right here, which it'll be let me exit out of this app. It'll be a different shape and color if we go ahead and run it. If we do it by hitting that run button, which it's not going to do it because I've already installed it manually. But if you don't install it by dragging it into the documents folder and installing it that way like I did, this button will be green and you can just hit run when your device is connected, and then to stop it you would hit this square would be red, and it would install your project onto your device like that. And then you could just, be looking at the logcat and doing different things in your project. But anyway, that's how you would make a test or a debug APK using Android Studio. And I'll follow up this video, I'll try to do it tomorrow night after work, with how to build a release Android app bundle with Android Studio. But for now, I think this is pretty good. And to note, while I'm doing it like this is because I think these instructions here and the ones on the GDevelop website, give it a minute, this computer is struggling, I think. Anyway, I think these instructions on how to build your project completely in the command line, like right here, they're not as beginner friendly as the way I'm showing you to do it. So I feel the way I showed you to do it allows you to jump right in, not knowing really anything, on how to change your environment variables or your path, and it allows you to immediately start manually building your GDevelop projects into Android applications without having to go through a lot of fuss, because the only 3 programs we installed were the Node.js, Cordova, and Android Studio, and these are all things we would need to install even if we were going to learn how to build our project completely in this command terminal. So I feel like if you can build it with Android Studio and see how easy it is, later if you want to go back and add the Gradle and the Java Development Kit and then set up your environmental variables or your path variables in order to build the project completely in your command line without ever having to open Android Studio, it's just going to be that much easier for you, because you were able to take this intermediate step of seeing how easy it really is to build your GDevelop projects into Android apps manually. So I do hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you can make use of it, making your own Android apps manually. And like I said, I'll do a follow-up to this one where we'll make a release Android app bundle instead of just what we did here today. We made an APK. And I'll also follow up where I finish the setup and I install Gradle and I install the Java Development Kit, and I go through and set my environment and my variables. That way there will also be a second part where you can see how to completely build the project in this command line. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to go over tonight. If not, if I missed something, just leave it in the comments and I'll address it tomorrow night after work when I hopefully have time to make the Android app bundle for release with the Android Studio. All right. Thank you very much.